Good evening, dear Medyascope viewers. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. Fugitive businessman Sezgin Baran Korkmaz, who came to the attention of the public through mob leader Sedat Peker's videos, has been arrested in Austria on June 19 at the request of the United States for money laundering. Republican People's Party representative to the United States, Yurter Ozcan, will be joining us to speak about this arrest. First, let's take a look at the details.
The Interpol previously issued a red notice for Korkmaz, who fled from Turkey in early December 2020 amid investigations by Turkey's Financial Crimes Investigation Board into Korkmaz's SBK holding and the holding's 6 companies over money laundering allegations in 4 provinces. In the investigations carried out last year, Medyascope teams determined that Korkmaz's companies were involved in $132 million money laundering scheme in Turkey. Following the investigations, prosecutors in Istanbul issued detention warrants against 19 company executives. 11 of those suspects were detained, but it emerged that 8 others, including Korkmaz, were abroad. Korkmaz was business partners with Jacob Kingston and his brother Isaiah, the executives of a Salt Lake City biodiesel company in the U.S. The brothers pleaded guilty in the U.S. over the tax credit scheme involving the Washakie Renewable Energy Company, which U.S. prosecutors said was creating fake production records to get renewable fuel tax credits, then laundering the proceeds from 2010 through 2016. Kingston family members confessed in their statements that between 2014 and 2018, they sent the revenues they obtained from the biofuel fraud network and the U.S. Treasury to Turkey through construction, pharmaceutical companies, and real estate investments under the control of SBK Holding, of which Sezgin Baran Korkmaz is the chairman of the board. Mehmet Demir, the lawyer of the fugitive businessman, confirmed his arrest at the request of the U.S. and said that his trial will initially take place in Austria. Demir added that Turkey also has an extradition request.
Hello, Mr. Ozcan. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So the fugitive businessman Sezgin Baran Korkmaz, whom I'll refer to as SBK from now on, has been arrested in Austria at the request of the United States. Could you perhaps summarize for our viewers why the U.S. wants this man arrested and what he is being accused of?
Okay, so the investigation that led to this outcome has been ongoing in the U.S. for some time right now. So his business partners who live in the U.S., they have actually been indicted in Utah for a number of charges. And out of 5 of them, 4 of the defendants have made an agreement with the prosecution, and they basically, told all the details about what they were doing. Only one of the defendants, Lev Aslan Derman, is not talking to the prosecution, but they've all been indicted by the grand jury last year, and they are waiting for the final trial to find out how much time they are going to serve. So they have been hit by over 40 charges. So it has a long list. But I'll just explain the grand scheme of what it's all about. So basically, they have created a system, a number of also business and fake businesses, where they actually claimed biodiesel production. And in the US, the IRS and the Environmental Protection Agency, they give a lot of incentives for such production because it's green, it's environment friendly, and especially during the presidency of Barack Obama, there were extra incentives for people to produce biodiesel, so it will harm the environment less. So these guys basically, they came up with a very sophisticated, I should say, scheme where they even built a $50 million factory for this project of theirs, and they claimed over $1 billion in return from the U.S. Treasury, of which they were able to get $511 million. And of course, when you have such a big return from such a scheme, you need to be creative in terms of where you are going to put this money. And of course, they did not want to keep this money in the US. They sent a big portion of it to Luxembourg and to Turkey. And that's where Sezgin Baran Korkmaz, as you referred as SBK, came to play. So I can give you a couple of numbers. Out of the 511 million that they got from the US Treasury, they sent $205 million to Luxembourg and to Turkey through Sezgin Baran Korkmaz, his entities or the entities that he controls. So out of the $205 million, they got 95 million back sent to US, which leaves us with $110 million somewhere in Turkey and in Luxembourg. So, out of that $110 million, just looking at the court paperwork, we see that they've made some very lavish purchases, some really expensive houses on the Bosphorus. They bought yachts, they bought companies that were near bankruptcy. So they invested some of that money. So the place where Sezgin Baran Korkmaz comes in is he's basically accused of 3 charges in the US now. So the first one is money laundering, the conspiracy to commit money laundering. Number 2 is wire fraud. And number 3 is obstruction of an ongoing investigation. So, he's done multiple offenses of these charges. So he's currently being, he's going to be tried with 225 years in jail. Where he's, I think the main role that SPK plays is, he's not involved in the US side of things much. He's not involved in the production, or he's not involved in, getting the money from the IRS or the US Treasury Department. But he kind of comes in as the international coordinator of, sending the money around the world into multiple companies, getting them back in the US, and the $105 million or $110 million that he did not get back to US, he was basically in charge of, putting that money to work. So the reason why I think this was a long time in the coming, where I just could not foresee how he will be not included in this investigation, because he played an important role. So this is the reason why the US asked Austria to put him on arrest, and now they are currently working on an extradition process.
Yes, Mr. Ozcan, as you said yourself, you have, you have tweeted about this in 2018. So this is something that you, as well as some journalists here in Turkey, have tried to put attention to, but we've only just started talking about it, I guess, more publicly in recent times. And we'll come back to that. But I do have one question in relation to the Kingston brothers and SBK. Now, these Kingston brothers have invested in Turkey, and they've come back and forth to Turkey as well. And there's this one photograph which we've shared with our viewers in the earlier news package, where we see one of the Kingston brothers, Jacob Kingston, SBK, and the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in the same image. Can you tell us about this photograph? What is the context, and is Erdogan here simply meeting with investors, for example? Is it possible for him not to have known about these shady relations?
Yeah, I think, there are several photos of the Kingston brothers with President Erdogan. One of them is actually in the Turkish embassy in Washington, D.C., and the other one is at a meeting in New York. I'm not aware whether they met with him in Turkey, actually. I know for a fact that they met with President Erdogan in New York and in Washington, D.C.
That's my mistake. I didn't know the context of the photograph.
Yeah, of course. No. I'm happy to explain. And basically, the image that these guys were trying to create, and you will, when you go back to interviews given by SBK, he was saying that they happen to be, his U.S. business partners, they happen to be in Istanbul on July 15th, 2016, when there was an attempted coup as you know, in Turkey, and they saw the tanks, they saw the firing, they saw the bullets, but the next morning they woke up and they said, no, we are still committed to Turkey. We want to put our money to work here. We believe in this country, etc., etc. And SBK, in addition to giving photographs with President Erdogan with this group, they were even welcomed by the Turkish investment agency. And it's interesting because SBK comes on those interviews and says, with my US partners, we are going to bring up to $1 billion from the US to Turkey to invest in, actual businesses and help the Turkish economy. There's actually a very interesting catch because this fraudulent scheme that they came up with, they actually asked from the US Treasury for over $1 billion in incentives and in subsidies, but they were only able to get half of it, $511 billion. So, I mean, the fact that SBK's goal was to bring in $1 billion, from the US to Turkey almost tells me that, he was actually aware of what the goal was in terms of defrauding the US Treasury. So, I mean, President Erdogan takes his security very seriously. When he goes anywhere, it's claimed that he's accompanied by several thousand security members, and not even like the average Turkish citizen, but even members of parliament or members of his cabinet are not able to come that close to him, just out of security purposes. So I think the big lie that SBK has been telling all along is that, he's like, I did not know, I thought they were a good businessman. But if he only had done a Google search, he would have found out that those very same individuals, they were actually indicted and fined with over $5 million for same reasons, in the US. So I think the story that was in play there was everybody knew who those guys were. Everybody was aware that something fishy was happening, but the AKP government was more than happy to bring in whatever kind of money it is, wherever it originated from. And as you know, they've changed the money laundering laws in Turkey for so many times that technically it's not even a crime to do money laundering in Turkey anymore, because as you know, you could bring in as much money as you want outside, into Turkish economy, and the banks, they cannot even ask you, where did you find this money from? So I think there was almost like a silent agreement between AKP and those guys. And the way these guys were sold on the idea as to why they should bring that money to Turkey was because they saw, through their connection to SBK, that they had direct access to the top echelons of the Turkish government and the AKP circles and how they will be protected. I mean, SBK, I think he's pretty good at schmoozing, and he's pretty good at having people to get to like him. So just a couple small examples, they will fly into Turkey, they will land in Istanbul, and these guys, they will not even have to go through passport control. So, even when a Turkish MP or a Turkish diplomat comes from abroad back to Turkey, they have to show their credentials, they have to show their passport, and these guys were not checked. At any given time, they were escorted by Turkish police, in official cars, wherever they had them, like, in security. So I think those, people from Utah and from California, they were convinced that at the end of this major heist that they were pulling in the US, they could bring the windfall of, hundreds of millions of dollars to Turkey and basically have a happy ending to their story and live in Turkey in a secure and happy environment for the rest of their lives. And they were wrong, basically.
Yeah. And now SBK has been arrested in Austria. His extradition to the United States, I guess, is awaited, even though he would prefer to be tried in Turkey. Of course, for a lot of people, an immediate comparison with Reza Zarrab comes to mind, and you yourself, again, have made this comparison. Of course, the cases are different, and but the point of comparison comes when if we think that if SBK is going to be tried in the US, he might collaborate with the US government. So do you think there is something worth comparing here? What could be some of the similarities and differences? And if SBK does end up collaborating with the US government, should Turkey be worried?
Yeah, I think the AKP government should be very, very worried. And there are so many similarities between Reza Zarrab and SBK. I mean, it's going to be a long laundry list, basically. So, both of them did illegal businesses. Both of them had direct access to President Erdogan and his top aides, basically. Both of them had police security. They had a lot of government support, and they will not even get in trouble because they will just pay off judges, and they had, a lot of journalists, or I should say so-called journalists, on payroll. So it will be almost virtually impossible to write anything about them. And I think this also answers one of your earlier comments. I've been talking about this case for almost 3 years now, and until last month, nobody wanted to talk about it. And the reason is because even though I had shared a lot of information on this guy to multiple different media outlets and newspapers and TV stations, nobody just wanted to touch it. So I think they also have a common mistake that they both did. Both Reza Zarrab and SBK, after their heist, basically after they pulled in all this money from illegal businesses, if they only stayed in Turkey, I think they would have been okay. They made the mistake of doing foreign travel. And of course, now SBK is going to come out and say, I want to go back to Turkey and I want to be tried there, because everybody knows that if he were to come back to Turkey, he will just try to pay his way out of jail. And everybody knows that. The Australian government knows that. The US authorities know that. When the case against Lev Aslan Derman and Kingston was ongoing in the US, the US federal prosecution in Utah, they had multiple inquiries with the Turkish Department of Justice in Ankara, of which none of them were responded. So they asked multiple times for more information on SBK, on his businesses, on his, they asked to put a hold on his bank accounts. They asked the Turkish Department of or Ministry of Justice to freeze his assets. They asked, him to send back the money that he was controlling, the ones, that came from the US, and none of that happened. So everybody knew that, the Turkish government or the Turkish Ministry of Justice was not responding. So everybody knew that, if something were to happen in terms of, prosecution or an actual trial, it will not be done in Turkey. So even that alone shows that, as you remember, Reza Zarrab, he was in jail 2013, December 25th, I believe. And then he was out of jail 6 weeks later, early February. And then he was put on, networks controlled by AKP. He was deemed as a hero who was helping bring down the Turkish deficit. He was bringing so much money from abroad. So, I mean, in both situations, there's this fake hero, almost like a Robin Hood, profile, who's made so much money, and they help to pour out, and they put the Turkish national interest first, and they are good people, and etc., etc. But all that PR machine eventually comes to an end, and the reality has a habit of catching up with people. Mm-hmm. So I think it's the case for both of them. And my personal feeling is, and I made the same call only 5 weeks after Reza Zarrab was caught in Florida. He was caught March 2016, and I gave an interview to Bir Gün newspaper about 4 weeks later after that. And I said, I'm pretty sure that, he's going to make an agreement with the US authorities, of which happened only a year and a half later. It took him a year and a half, to sort things out. And then he realized that it's not going to happen. And I'm making basically the same bet that SBK, when he is shipped back to US from Austria, I think he's going to make he's going to settle with the US prosecution, basically.
Yeah. And so how do you read the silence that is, the silence coming within the ruling coalition in Turkey? Does this silence indicate essentially that everyone is in one way or another involved in this corruption circle? I mean, why hasn't there been any reaction? SBK has been arrested and he will most probably be tried in the United States and not in Turkey. So how do you read this lack of reaction coming from the government?
I think it's a major characteristic of President Erdogan. When he doesn't know what to do, he just keeps silent. I observed a similar response from him when Zarab was first caught in March 2016. And as you may remember, initially he did not say anything. And then eventually some journalists asked him and he said, it's a personal matter. Reza Zarab is a citizen of our country, but whatever he is, accused of is a personal thing. It doesn't have anything to do with us. And I remember 2 months later, it must have been, I think, late May, when Reza Zarab's, pre-trial process began in New York. I was in the courtroom then, and I was in the courtroom for every other hearing in the actual trial. I remember that his defense lawyers put in a list of things where they tried to showcase Reza Zarab as a good citizen, okay? And, that's a typical thing that they do in the US. They usually get letters of recommendation from your friends, from your, employees, and, they are trying to make a good case that, you're a good citizen. And in that letter that the defense lawyers prepared for Reza Zarab, they actually said, look, he's a rich businessman who has a good heart. And here's the following associations and foundations that he's donated to. And that list included a foundation that was initiated and spearheaded by Emine Erdogan, the first lady of Turkey. And then there was a change of reaction from AKP government, basically. And on top of that observation that I made in the courtroom then, it was the same feedback that I was getting from some colleagues who work for the U.S. government in Washington, D.C. And they said that as soon as that was uncovered, that he mentioned giving money to a charity spearheaded by Emine Erdogan, their phones just started ringing, from Ankara as well as from Turkish embassy in Washington, D.C., trying to understand what's going on, whether it's going to touch them or not. So I think it may be a similar pattern with how things may turn out with SBK. He's saying that he's not going to talk in court, but if you face, 225 years in jail, just look at past statistics. In such cases, more than 95% people do settle with the U.S. prosecution, with the hope of, seeing sunlight one day before they die, basically.
Yurter Ozcan, thank you so much for this detailed account of SBK's businesses and what might potentially happen once he's arrested. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.